Hello everyone, thanks again for joining us today here at the Virginia Living Museum. I just want to let you all know, so today what we'll be doing is we're going to be feeding our amphibians here in our main building amphibian room. And we've got several different ambassador salamanders and frogs and even a few toads. And what I'd like to go ahead and mention is, this is part of our special Earth Day week, and this is the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And over the course of the week, we'll be highlighting all of our conservation efforts here at the Virginia Living Museum. And, so other than feeding today, I'll be talking about one of those conservation programs known as Frog Watch USA, which the Virginia Living Museum participates in. So what we'll start with are a few of our salamanders. So today we've got some nice wiggly crickets for them, and they are dusted with a well-rounded vitamin and mineral supplement so that we make sure they are wholly nutritious, and we make sure that we also feed our crickets a very nutritious diet that's also high in calcium, because we want to make sure we take very good care of not only our animals, but the things that feed our animals. So, I'll be grabbing one of these guys and get a close-up view. So in this very custom environment, we have our spotted salamanders here. I know one of them will be right under this rock, and I'll get him to kind of come on out, because these guys are very secretive and they're ambush predators. But when they see a food item, they absolutely can't resist it. So these are our spotted salamanders that are native to Virginia, and they live in this coastal area, very low-lying elevation. And so our spotted salamanders, they are the ones that they inhabit a lot of woodland ponds in the coastal areas of Virginia, and they make use of these ponds that tend to fill up even more during the wet season, just after winter, after that thaw, and after the snow starts melting. When we're still hunkered inside and trying to bundle up, these guys, once it starts kind of warming up just a little bit above that freezing temperature, and those little depressions in the ground start filling up with water, that's when these guys start getting active, and they'll migrate over to woodland ponds and make use of that area and that shallow water to lay some eggs and hopefully produce some more offspring. So yeah, we have a question.
Yes, Jennifer Mayer Glasspool would like to know, how old are they?
So these guys are, they're not too old. They're about 8 years old, and that's including the time when they hatch from an egg, because salamanders, I don't know if many of our viewers know this, but salamanders start their life cycle off much like frogs and toads do. So they have a juvenile stage, much like a tadpole for a frog, but it is a little bit different because they don't look too, they're not too dissimilar in appearance from what they are now, and you can kind of see. So this guy likes to hide under there, and I'll show what a full-grown adult spotted salamander looks like. Hey, buddy.
How long do they live?
These guys will live anywhere from 10 to 15 years on average.
How many crickets do they eat?
Oh, yeah. Well, we'll feed them, and here I can kind of get a good, nice good view of them here. So we'll feed these guys about 2 to 3 crickets every time we feed them, and we feed them, just about every other day. So these spotted salamanders they have a good camouflage and defense mechanism. So they do produce a little bit of a skin irritant and a kind of a foul-tasting substance, so that predators, they'll see that these spots and they'll be like, okay, obviously this is not a prey item that I really want to tangle with because it's not going to taste very good.
So Tyler wants to know, how long does it take for a frog eggs to hatch?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So it really depends on the species. That could be a matter of, from when the egg is actually laying. It could be weeks for it to go through and its embryonic stage and then produce its hatch as a juvenile, which again, as a frog or a toad, it's a tadpole, and as a salamander, it's just a juvenile salamander. Another question?
Yes, why do you hold on to the cricket instead of placing them in the tank?
That's an excellent question. So we just want to make sure that during feeding, we ensure that these guys are eating the proper amount. So we like to just confirm that they do grab onto the cricket and eat the whole meal, because we don't want to release a whole bunch in here and then the crickets end up hiding and we think that they get eaten, but they're actually but our salamanders aren't eating their full amount. So it's a good way for us to kind of monitor their overall calorie intake, and and we do sometimes let them go as a form of enrichment so that they can still exercise their natural hunting instinct.
Do they use camouflage?
Yes, they do, actually. So with spotted salamanders, it's a little bit of a mix of warning colors and camouflage, because those bright spots, even though they look like they stand out in this environment, if they're underneath some leaf litter or something on the floor of a forest, they kind of blend in a little bit more with how the light plays and how the light kind of shines through. So so they do have a little bit of camouflage. And so this next guy, this is our barred tiger salamander. And what I'll do is I'll kind of lift up his hide real quick so you guys can get a good view of him. So this is one of the largest species of salamander in North America. And we named him Chompers because you'll see why in just a second. So Chompers is a very eager eater. He's very alert and is always kind of looking for the next meal. Oh, there you go, buddy. And he's very quick to respond to movement. And tiger salamanders eat just about everything. I mean, they will eat worms, slugs, and of course crickets and insects like that, grasshoppers. But they'll also eat vertebrates. Sometimes other salamanders will be part of their meal. Sometimes small frogs. They sort of have an eat first and ask questions later mentality. And so they are just voracious predators. They may not look very threatening to us, of course, because they can't really do anything to a human. But yeah, if any insects, if they saw this, they would be shaking in their exoskeleton. Yeah, we have another question?
Cindy Bridgers would like to know, what is the difference between a salamander and a newt?
That's a fantastic question. Well, they all kind of belong to a very similar group of amphibians. I mean, they're all sort of, in a way, salamanders or caudates. They all have 4 limbs. They have tails. So they're related, but usually salamanders tend to be more terrestrial than newts do. The native species we have in Virginia, the eastern spotted newt, they start out life, their juvenile form, they start out on the land, as opposed to the salamander you see in front of you, which starts out in the water. And when they become adults, they will, the newt will actually become a more aquatic version, and so they'll kind of return to the water, whereas these guys will absorb their gills and develop their lungs and come out onto the land and live their life terrestrially. Yep.
Camden would like to know if they eat sharks.
Do they eat sharks? Well, I bet they would try, especially if a shark moved. But honestly, there would be no way for any of those animals to interact in the wild.
Are they endangered salamanders?
That's what I love that question, because you know what? Actually, barred tiger salamanders, they're not endangered because they're actually not they're not a native species of Virginia, and their population is not doing so bad in the wild. But that being said, our native tiger salamander, the eastern tiger salamander, which is a very close relative of this guy, is endangered and is having a lot of trouble in their wild population. So, you know, I would just say, and amphibians as a whole are certainly, are certainly, hi there, buddy, in a lot of trouble because of all the threats that face them globally. Oh, here you go, bud.
Wants to know if Chompers is a male or female.
Chompers is a male, and but it is very hard to tell just why that is, because males have, comparatively, males are not that different from females, and they will usually their tail is a little bit bigger. Oh, sorry, buddy. Here, let me get you a fresh one. And otherwise visually, it's really hard to tell the difference between the two. But this guy you see in front of you, this is a narrowmouth toad. It's one of our native species of frog and toad in Virginia. Now, even though they're called a narrowmouth toad, they're actually not. They're not quite as closely related to other true toads as you would imagine. Their skin is very smooth, and they have, they have characteristics of kind of a frog, and they belong in a different family than other normal true frogs and true toads do. So they're kind of arbitrarily called a toad, even though they're not quite in that same family of amphibian or frogs and toads. So they are a little unique, and they are one of the loudest callers. Despite their small size, they have one of the loudest calls that you could imagine, and it sounds like a sheep baying. So if you ever, after a long rain, if you ever hear the sound of sheep calling, but you're nowhere near any farm, that might actually be this guy calling at night.
What's the difference? How do you tell the difference between frogs and toads?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And as I kind of described, this guy, even though he is called a toad, he really doesn't share that same relationship with other toads. So the answer is it's kind of arbitrary, because in a way you could say that all toads are a type of frog, but not all frogs are toads, if that makes any sense. Just like turtles and tortoises. Technically, all tortoises are a version of a turtle, but not all turtles are tortoises. So, so the big difference being, especially in Virginia, the rough skin and being more terrestrial as opposed to being closer to the water. So we'll actually see some toads here in just a second.
Can they be poisonous?
Well, narrowmouth toads can have a little bit of a skin irritant secretion, but not nearly as much as toads do, especially like Fowler toads and American toads. They have special glands on their head that produce a type of poison called bufotoxin, and it is very, very foul tasting for a lot of predators, and can actually be fatal to very, very small predators. So they know to think twice before trying to tangle with a toad.
Benjamin wants to know how the frog swallows so fast.
Oh, well, they have a very interesting thing they do where they have help from their eyes, actually. A lot of amphibians have a special muscle that when they close their eyes, their eyeballs actually get pushed a little bit into their mouth cavity, and that helps push the food that they have in their mouth down their throat even more. So it's a very unique type of muscle to them, And they use all of those things combined to kind of help move that food down into their stomach as fast as they can.
How big do they get?
So this is full adult size for a narrow-mouthed toad, and by size comparison, I'm going to kind of put my my hand right next to it. So
Teeny.
these guys are very, very small. This is as big as they get, and they're one of the smallest species of frogs we have here, other than a little grass frog. And yet, at the same time, they produce one of the loudest calls. And it's so high and so trilling that it can carry for a great distance. So it's very interesting how these guys tend to operate like that. So here we have a few of our native toads. These are our Fowler's toads. And you'll see these guys just all over the place. They've got... they love being on the land. They won't venture too far from water. Here you go, buddy. Oh, okay. They don't venture too far from the water, but they do venture much further away than other frogs will, like bullfrogs or things like that.
James wants to know what the biggest frog is.
Oh, the biggest frog. Well, I'll actually be getting one of those guys out here in just a little bit. Come here, buddy. I know. Okay. All right. Well, he doesn't want to come out, so that's fine. So actually, our largest frog species in Virginia is the bullfrog. Oh, here we go. So we'll see. And yeah, I'll show you guys one of those in just a second. I'll see if our our toad here will want to eat one of these little crickets. Oh, there he goes.
How long is their lifespan?
So for these toads, it's about 5 to 8 years. So not really all that long. And this is getting close to full grown for some of them. Males will be usually a little bit smaller than females and won't grow quite as large. Females will get a little bit bigger. But the males, you can kind of see that he has this darker throat to him. The males use their vocal sac, is what it's called, to produce that song that you hear at night. And for these guys, it's also very loud, and also kind of close to a sheep bang in a way, but a little bit different than the guy we saw before. So. And I wish I could I wish I could say that in a way that was more specific than that, but it is somewhat hard to tell the difference between these two calls of these two species, even though they look completely different.
Are there any invasive species of amphibians that are taking over territory that should be for native species?
Oh, excellent question. Yeah, that is a concern in quite a few areas of the world. Thankfully, Virginia doesn't quite have the perfect climate for those types of invasive species. One of the biggest ones that you might have heard about is the Maritime Toad, or the cane toad, which is one of the largest species of toad in the world, and also one of the most toxic. And the areas that it takes a foothold in, which I think is a problem in more southern states, doesn't seem to be able to come up quite this far north. It's just the winters here are just a little bit too harsh and too cold for them, especially when we actually do get a real.
How long can water-dwelling frogs live on land?
Water-dwelling frogs, which could be aquatic frogs like bullfrogs and green frogs and things like that. So they can't last very long out of the water. I would say, they will sometimes come out to bask, and they can do that for probably about an hour or two at a time. But if they were out for several hours...
Oh, there we go.
Oh, so, I actually forgot the question.
So did I. Oh, how long can
water-dwelling frogs live on land.
Oh, right, yeah. So, so they could do maybe a matter of an hour or two, and especially it would have to be out of direct sunlight. Past that, they would not last long because their skin dries out really quickly. And that's why they need to stay near the water, because their skin is so thin and so fragile that it can dry out, especially under direct sunlight. It could be a matter of several minutes on a really hot day.
What's your favorite amphibian, Travis?
That's a tough question. Honestly, there's so many cool ones because amphibians as a whole are one of the most interesting and bizarre group of animals that you could hope to really learn about, because they've broken every rule of nature that they've made. They've been around for so long. It's really hard for me to say which one's my favorite. I would say, I certainly have some that I absolutely adore as individuals here at the museum. And in the wild, I just have so many that I like. I don't think I could pick just one, honestly. It just depends on what we're really talking about.
I don't know. I think this guy's my favorite.
Oh yeah, the narrow-mouthed toad by far has one of the more interesting calls, and he is very interesting, especially for his size. Can produce a lot of sound. Yeah, we got another question.
How many frogs do you have?
Well, we've got, I guess here in the museum, we've got close to about, probably about 40 individual frogs as a whole, and that ranges over, about 10 or 11 species. And one of which you'll see here is our American bullfrog, and this is the largest aquatic frog, and actually the largest frog in North America. And this is the one that it's kind of widespread throughout the world, unfortunately, because they are also the ones that people will consume with frog legs and things like that. So, and that kind of brings up my my next point, is when we talk about frogs and toads, we talk about how sensitive they are, and how much in need of conservation amphibians the world over really need, because even though the population of bullfrogs is doing well, there's so many amphibians that just aren't, and that's there's about 7,000 to 8,000 species of amphibians in the world, and about half of them, a third to half of them, are all threatened with their population is threatened, and they could be at risk of extinction. So, and that's just because they're so susceptible to disease, they're susceptible to habitat destruction and pollution, that it's really difficult to really imagine just how much their populations in the world are kind of being affected right now. And that's why we participate in a program called Frog Watch USA, which was founded by back in '98 by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums, and it's a fantastic program that we help we recruit and teach volunteers to go out, and they learn how to identify frog calls just like this guy, which has sort of a call that sounds like a bull, which is where the name comes from, and they're able to identify them and catalog which species are calling and record that as data, and then we can keep a closer eye on just how the populations in the wild are doing in our local area.
Where do you get all your amphibians?
So a lot of our amphibians actually come from other facilities where they have a reproduction plan in place for them. So we try, we do our best and to kind of circulate species around in the between zoos and aquariums, so we're not taking any from the wild. So that's actually where these guys came from. They were originally down at the Virginia Aquarium, and So they ended up needing a place for them to go because one of their exhibits, was getting replaced. So we said we'd love to have them, and so they have been fantastic ambassador animals for us. So we really appreciated that. So I'd like to say, everybody who joined us today, thank you so much, and I hope you appreciated our amphibians as much as I do, and you got to kind of see that a closer look at just how amazing these animals are and often overlooked. And please stick with us as we celebrate the 50th Earth Day here at the Virginia Living Museum all week long. And we'll be putting out videos and talking about our conservation programs, just like Frogwatch USA. And at 2:30 today, please tune in for another one of our live feeds. And we hope to see you guys.